welcome everybody to today's session, which is on the future of social sciences commercialization. And we're going to be exploring where the biggest opportunities lie for the commercialization of social sciences, how academia and industry can look to take advantage, and on Aspect's future plans in terms of driving and supporting social science research commercialization. So this is our final session in the Aspect annual event series, which has been running across September and October. And I'm delighted we've got an excellent panel with us today. So I'll just introduce myself first. I'm Julia Black, I'm Chair of Aspect and Strategic Director of Innovation at the LSE and also Professor of Law there. On the panel today, we have Ian Tracy, who's co-founder of Anchored In, Vikas Shah, who is CEO of the Swisscop Group and also an Honorary Professor of Business at the University of Manchester, and Melanie Netch, who is Deputy Director, Innovation and Impact at the ESRC, which is part of UKRI. So thank you very much for joining me on the panel today. And the way we're going to run today, so I'm going to ask each panel member to give some brief opening remarks on this topic from their own perspective. And then we will have some discussion and we will open it up to Q&A. So please do use the Q&A function. Don't raise your hand, I won't be able to see it, but if you put your questions in the Q&A, we'll be able to pick those up. And we'll be delighted to answer any questions that you have. Questions can remain anonymous, but you can put your name if you want to, and we'll try and answer as many as we can. So what we've been exploring in this series so far is the benefit of social science research commercialization, thinking about the opportunities, some of those challenges, some of the benefits that there can be, both to the academics, but also how that research can be mobilized in different ways and rendered sustainable by generating some sort of income stream, for example, which can then enable the research to continue. So we've got a series of, hopefully if you look on the website, you'll be able to see there's a series of the podcasts of different sectors, of the different sessions that we've had, etc. And I just want to think about, today we'll be drawing some of those threads together. So I'm going to ask Ian, I'm going to ask you to kick off with your own thoughts on the benefits of going into this exercise of research commercialization for academics themselves. Do you want to start us off with some of your own thoughts and experience of working with academics in this way?
Of course, thank you, Julia, and it's a pleasure to be here. So my first thought is that we have a horrible tendency to trivialize knowledge, and we seem to have reduced it to STEM is good and not STEM is not good. And this really was brought to my attention when I was working with an early stage company, and the two founders had a degree in events management, a BSc. And I was quizzing them about this, thinking, wow, this is amazing. Are you taking a scientific approach to organizing events? Are you looking at feedback loops, etc., etc.? And they said with a completely straight face, don't be daft, it has to be a BSc, because if it was a BA, people would think this topic was made up. And my heart sank when I heard that, and I also thought about all those poor mathematicians around the country who used to be very proud of their BA. But the point I'm trying to make is, if you look at the STEM world, it's often technology push. You know, we build the better widget and then we wonder what we do next. I was working at CERN when they validated the Higgs boson, and I argued at the time that as a discovery, it was irrelevant. And the reason being was that the coffee still falls off the table in the morning without knowing why it falls to the floor. What I've loved about the Aspect projects is, by their very definition, they start with the society that we're in. They're inherently grounded and human. So when we come to the question of, well, why should we engage with industry? And actually, I would argue the question is, why should we engage with society? There are a range of different answers. The first I would believe in is that we have a moral duty to improve the society that has funded our research. To me, it's part of that social contract that exists between taking the money from the government, etc. But I also think there's some better, more personal reasons why this is a good thing. And that is, by engaging with us, we make our ideas better, we explore, we push the boundaries better. I've been working with a company in the Aspect And it was an interesting journey for me because I listened to the idea, and I'll be honest, the first thought that went through my head when they finished was, oh, that's their idea. More worryingly was the second thought that went, hang on, I think that's their best idea. And I went out and I connected with 20 different organisations of all sorts to try and share this idea and see what we can do. And it was obvious at first that I hadn't understood the idea, and the failing was mine. And the first person I spoke to, a good old friend, at the end of it, she just went, Ian, you need to go back because what you're saying doesn't make any sense. You obviously don't know what you're talking about. She was a good enough friend to be so candid with me. And so I did go back and I did understand the idea for the first time. And now we have a situation by engaging with the society that we live with. He's got multiple organisations helping him to get research funding to help them solve industrial problems. For example, during COVID, we've lost 4 billion in face-to-face charity collections. And he's got a way of trying to replace that with alternative forms of collection. And the same idea was being used for gambling awareness. And what was interesting though was the tension between, we were thinking this was a great idea to reduce gambling addiction, and the other side saw it as a fantastic idea of getting more people to almost gambling addicted because that's where the most money is. And so you can imagine the tension that sits. One of the big things that has happened over the last few months is the world has got more connected. And now with Zoom and Teams and things like that, I'm able to get people in America and both coasts and China to attend events and investment meetings here in London. True, some of them are wearing sweatshirts and having a cup of coffee in the morning to join, but they never came before. Coming to the close, I'm just putting on screen my LinkedIn code. I would love you to connect with me and carry on the conversation. You also get to see me with my pre-COVID haircut. My final conclusion before I hand back to Julia is projects and society benefit when they work from each other, and communication is key, and speak to many people to do it, because it's the people you least know tend to give you the most insights. So thank you, and I'm handing back to Julia now.
That's great, thanks Ian. And I think many things there that we can pick up on. Being grounded in society, I think that's fundamental actually, and that really resonates with social science researchers. But I think what you were also saying there in terms of, STEM has a lot to offer in this space, but social sciences doesn't, I think is something that we also need to pick up. And because I was wondering if I could come to you actually to just think about that and just think about, well, what is the role of social sciences research commercialization, and what is the role of social sciences in major innovations, both on their own and in conjunction with STEM, from your own experience in this field?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me today, and it's a real honor to be part of this panel. And I thought I'd just start with a reflection from kind of earlier in my career when I had a technology business, and we used to be in the US a lot then, when people were allowed to fly places. And one of the things that I always found really interesting was quite a fundamental difference in approach between US innovation and European and UK innovation, not in terms of the actual nuts and bolts of how we make things, but actually in the background of how that innovation process starts. So the US companies that I was working with, predominantly in technology and in scale-up technology in particular, the social sciences, the liberal arts, as they often refer to them, were held with intellectual equity to science. And what that meant is that, those large businesses, which were still in their infancy then, were also looking at languages, philosophy, the humanities, and all of these subjects as part of the input into the actual engineering and science part of innovation. The net effect of that, of course, is that the US has become extraordinarily dominant in innovation. And one of the net reasons for this is because arguably, by including the social sciences as in parity with engineering and more traditional STEM subjects, you end up with technologies and innovation which are much more appropriate for human culture. And that's something which in particular, I think, in the UK and Europe, we need to learn a lot from, Because when we're looking at technology transfer in UK universities, where we're working as investors as a business as well, there does seem to be a lack of a joined up approach. And just one really practical example, there's a huge amount of activity right now around language, because as we move into automated customer service, the bots that we talk to have to be able to speak to us and understand what we're trying to say. The smart universities in the US are combining their, machine learning scientists with their top linguistics professors to make sure that those solutions actually do the job well. And I really, really hope that, with programs like Aspect, that the net effect of that is that we start to get much more interdisciplinary and more cross-department collaboration to create those new innovations of the future.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the point that you make about that interdisciplinary and that connection, and as we've said before, an innovation is not a single lone genius going out. That is often seen as that way. It's often a team, pulling together, and you need both the STEM and the shape disciplines, social science, humanities, and arts, often to be able to bring together that innovation and make and interact tech with society. But I was wondering, Mel, if I could turn to you in your role, thinking about how we fund and support innovation based on social sciences research. From your perspective, do we need different types of support and funding for social science research innovation than we do from STEM, or are there things that we can, or can we just use the kind of the one size fits all support model?
Thanks, Julia. Hopefully you can see my screen. I think that's a really important question. And I think it's one that, working with Aspect, is one that you're helping us actually find some of the answers to some of these big questions that we have. Social sciences and the arts humanities are not STEM, and STEM is not the arts humanities and social sciences. And actually understanding what the potential is across all of them, I think is interesting, in the learnings that we could have around commercialization. So with the topic and the view of the future of social science commercialization, I hope I'll capture that within my one slide that I have to present, to just hopefully help share the ideas around. It's great to see all the participant lists. There's actually quite a few familiar faces, I can't see, but familiar names there, which is actually a group of professionals who've been thinking about this, and we're all grappling with the same challenge about what does this mean for the social sciences particularly. For those who don't know me, I'm Deputy Director of Innovation and Impact at ESRC, and business engagement and commercialization for the social sciences is something that my team is very much looking at and trying to understand what we in ESRC can do within this particular challenge. So just to help broaden the framework, I've tried to just present the slide as in the future of the ambition of where could we be, and then thinking about what do we need to get there, which I think Julia crosses over into that question. So UKRI is developing a definition of commercialization, which we're hoping is actually very inclusive and helps to maybe broaden the opportunities that people see that they're part of. Looking at it as the process by which new or improved technologies, products, processes, and services are brought to market. And I think that's really important, because where the social sciences sit, it isn't always about a new technology. And in fact, a lot of what we have to offer is methodologies or insights into how to apply something. And the question is, how do you commercialize or scale up and sustain that impact that you have? Now, I've got a bunch of footprints on the screen because I actually think this is a journey, and we're all on this journey together in a way. And I don't think anybody really owns it, but we have to work together. And there's a broad approach that we need to have in order to solve this. So when I was thinking about the future, I was thinking, actually, what would it be nice to have? What would be a good ambition? And actually, the first one I was thinking about will actually increase demand from our academic communities in wanting to actually take an idea and take it forward and thinking, yes, there is something there for me that I can do. But to do that, we probably need case studies and ideas to support. And we also need training pathways to help people within that. And that's particularly what the Success program is doing, is understanding what training pathways do we need? What is there more things that we need to think about that are different for the social science area? We've also in ESRC, as part of the ISCF Healthy Aging program, the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, we're working in partnership with Zinc, which is broadly about commercialization, and also looking at different training and support that needs to be, and actually how do we bring that together and share learnings across with the Success. So we're in early stages of our journey, I think. The other question, of course, is the IP potential. And this is something that people often talk about around what does IP mean for the social sciences and actually for the humanities as well. As we said, often the IP is in the knowledge base that we have, or understanding the frameworks, or creating the toolkit, but the application of that toolkit within that. So how do we measure and value IP within this space? And I also, thinking across the future, is working a lot with my KE colleagues, knowledge exchange colleagues, and tech transfer colleagues in universities, and knowledge transfer partnerships, etc. Is actually helping universities to really look across its breadth of disciplines within what the university is. And in order to do that, we need to support the system behind that, which is everything from the professional people, but also contracts and department heads and supervisors, to really understand what the potential is in this space and how to look at it. And then the other side of it for the future of commercialization is actually capturing the true value. At the moment, it's often focused on income return and job creation, but actually if there is a cost saving or a benefit, if you've created a social enterprise and you're helping out your local policy, or your local government, how do we capture that benefit of saving the government money because something has been commercialized or spun out across that? And how are we looking at that within our metrics and our reporting structure? And also, I think this links in my final point that I think is really important, is actually, I think we need to gain more insights into what works. We need the research, we need the evaluation to inform us in understanding where is it best, who needs to put the effort in within this space. So I've tried to shape these, Julie, in the sense of this is what I think we could be at in a no particular time frame that I've set this. But I think being part of the Aspect board and being part of the community thinking about this, I would like to just re-echo, I do think it's a journey that we're on. And in the future, I think this is a potential way that we could be globally leading and helping to challenge and support other countries as they embark on this journey too.
Well, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. And certainly in terms of the spirit of experimentation and piloting, we've got over a dozen projects running in Aspect at the moment, and are capturing all the learnings from those to be able to feed into that process. So I was just really reflecting some of the challenges and obstacles as well as opportunities. And one of the things that I've been thinking about is, well, is the nature of research, the nature of IP protection. So I'm wondering if I can get the panel's views on this. So a number of outputs of social sciences, arts, humanities research are patentable. And so you don't have that between either 14 or 20 years monopoly, as it were, where you can go and explore your idea and bring it to market without anybody else coming in and eating your lunch, as it were, whereas you don't necessarily can't get that protection in social sciences. So I was just wondering what impact that has, both on the ability to commercialize, but also on the attractiveness of the venture from an investment point of view. So I don't know who would like to kick off on that. This issue of IP VCAS. Perhaps I can turn to you.
Sure. Yeah. No, I'm happy to jump in. I think the perspective I can give you on this is kind of how investors evaluate, in firms or ideas they invest in, and IP protection is sometimes misunderstood, because when you're working with technology transfer, there's this notion that if it hasn't got a patent, it has no value. But I can tell you quite concretely that probably more than half the businesses we've invested in have significant intellectual property, but it's nothing to do with a patent. It might be a black box algorithm, it might be a brand, it might be a method, it might be an individual, right? Yeah. There are so many different nuances to what constitutes intellectual property from an investment point of view, which are far different to the I have developed a molecule and here is a patent on said molecule. So yeah. I do think we need to fundamentally change how we think of what constitutes intellectual property to be able to have better conversations with investors and funders to move this entire work forward.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Ian, from your perspective, because often, particularly also metrics, we're often asked as universities, well, how many patents have you got? And so your reflections, having worked for a long time in this space.
So I think patents are a double-edged sword. I think in areas like bioscience, where there is a whole ecosystem that is built around the value of patents, I'd say it's worth it. I think if I even look to a lot of the stuff I was doing at STFC, which is physics-centric, the cost of creating and defending a patent is actually a millstone around the neck of many an early stage company that gets underestimated.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, for the last few years, Google, Apple, Microsoft have spent more on aggressive patent litigation than they have done on generating new ideas. And what you want your patent for, and there's other ways of doing this, like publishing of papers, is not to take on Google, because you're going to lose. It's to stop Google, IBM, etc. taking you on. And so you're better off using the alternative routes and using things like copyright and trade secrets for your knowledge, and don't get hung up on the patents, is my view.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think it's one of those things I think that also it means when you're looking at a research commercialization idea, is one focusing more on the business model, perhaps, than on how can I get this protected and licensing and spin out? I mean, one of the things that I've been struck by moving into this space actually is that so much of it is about business model. And then actually spin out and then might involve spin out and licensing, but they might be relatively minor part. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's what is the business model, where's the value creation, how do you get your hands on the value creation and take a slice in very simple terms? And also the other big element is, do I have that rounded team that can deliver the whole project? Which is technology, route to market, managing the money, and the classic one, it's a three-headed monster, isn't it? The person who knows the cash, the person who knows the tech and however you define your tech, and the person who knows how to run a machine, the business machine.
No, you need, and absolutely needing all three. So I once had a stat. I've no idea if it's true, because you can probably tell me that in innovation companies, only about 20% of the people employed there are actually tech specialists, and everybody else is doing legal, marketing, supply chains, logistics.
If I could just add a point to this, which is, it's also useful to look at alternative sources of funding in this space, right? Because it might feel counterintuitive, but there's a lot of venture philanthropy that also funds innovation. It's not just investment funds. It's not just private equity. A lot of philanthropists also have quite a deep stake in innovation, because they realize that as philanthropists, you can take a risk on funding essential innovation, which otherwise is not yet commercialized or may not have a commercial purpose. So even in science, a lot of that early stage innovation is funded by philanthropy. So I think as a group, do make sure that you keep having conversations with venture philanthropists around this kind of work too.
I think that's an excellent point, because I'm going to turn to focus on funding as well here, because some of the things that one's developing, particularly in the social science space, they're not uniquely, might be social impact companies or social enterprises. I mean, obviously it could be wider than that. And so we often talk about how to get the right money to the right people at the right time in the right place with the right risk appetite. Bearing in mind that they're very early stage, you've got a mix between grants, philanthropy, and then it might move into profitability, but with different risk appetites and seeking different rates of return, I suppose, on the investment. So, and one of the things that the debate is currently around, isn't it, is do we have that right scaffolding of funding going from grants, in the right type of way through, because as you were saying, through sort of that more sort of venture philanthropy out into the more traditional, as it were, classic investor space. So Mel, needless to say, there is a question in the chat, which is, what is UKRI going to do about funding in this space? But just, I think for all of us, all the panelists actually, just if you could just give me your own sense of how we should be structuring that funding scaffolding, that funding support, as it were, as we move from grant into the venture philanthropy and on and up with different risk appetites at different points. Mel, I'm going to ask you though to kick off.
Thanks, Julie. Just on the IP discussion, just reflecting on this, and I think one of the things is from UKRI is we have meetings with the Intellectual Property Office, and we're trying to unpick this for what it means across the humanities and social science. I think one of the key thoughts too is it's not that the question about intangible creations isn't just a challenge for the social science and humanities as well. Have we forced the STEM side just to focus only on the standard ideas of IP, and is there lessons to be shared back across those disciplines as well as we all sit and look at this? I think that's just an opportunity moving forward. On the funding side, not a surprising question in a way, and the answer to that is there other sources of funding for the social sciences at the moment? And the answer for that is slightly dependent on spending review funding. We're in a spending review period. But we've also just got a new commercialization center hub in UKRI. And actually, we're really looking across us and how do we draw together what we do? So we're not necessarily doing aspects in isolation. So looking at our catalyst funding that other colleague or other councils have in UKRI, and actually Paul Meller, myself, Art Humanities, and myself, ESRC, our teams, we're looking at what can we learn from those for if we were to implement something within this space, and actually how do we bring together interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary approaches. Now, the one source from ESRC at the moment, as I've just flagged, we're about to launch the kickoff for the Healthy Aging Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. That's got a particular lens to it. But Zinc will be announcing a series of workshops for people who are interested in looking at what that potential funding is. So that will be coming up. And then, of course, depending on how it works and how your institution, Julia, there is a success program as well that's trying to help us learn and take people through with good ideas. Now, my other answer is if you've got a really good idea that you think could be potentially scaled up, is you shouldn't wait for funding to do that. Is you should be speaking to the people in your university, the people with the knowledge, and can help challenge you on your ideas about what is that or where should we go. Now, many people on this might already be working in those units or departments within that, and would probably welcome people coming and just thinking about the ideas of, if I do want to scale this up, is it a commercialization scale up? Are there other ways we need to think about it? And what does that mean? And how do I have to go about it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Ian, can I just turn to you actually again? You've been working in this space for a while at that interface.
Sure. I mean, so I think one of the things I would reflect upon is don't get too hungry to take other people's cash. Things like venture capital comes with a whole bunch of strings. Namely somebody else who has an opinion on what you should be doing. And I know in my own personal life, my first startup failed because me and the investor didn't get on. We disagreed over where we should be going, and to be fair, they had the money that was paying my wage. They quite rightly had an opinion that I had to listen to. And so I would urge the academics, all startup people, sorry, not just the academics by a long stretch, I would urge all entrepreneurs to don't forget the power of consulting as a means of bootstrapping.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful feedback loop. You do a good job, somebody pays the bill. And more importantly, it also gives you that direct market knowledge. So when you're ready to scale, you can start talking about this is what the customer wants. It was interesting for me, yesterday I was on a webinar for grant funding from Innovate UK, and they said on the market engagement side, they now want companies to quote conversations with end users and not to quote market research reports. So that might be the mood music, that it's much more about speak to real people and put real answers down rather than hypothetical market research. I'm sure Vikas might have something to join us in with.
It's really, as you were speaking there, it made me kind of reflect on, when we're doing pitching days and workshops at various universities, what are we seeing? And one of the real bits of advice that I tend to give a lot of those, whether it's academics or students or postgrads who are commercializing or coming up with ideas, is think about the next question you need to answer. Because actually what tends to happen is the projects that you're seeing are jumping several steps down the road and are now wanting a big pool of venture funding or whatever, when actually what they need to do is just do some immediate validation to prove, is this real? Is this worth pursuing? So, we were working with a couple of teams on graphene, and they created this fantastic water filter. And, the presentation was, we want a couple of £1 million to go and do this. And I said, well, let's just knock on some doors and see if we can just go and play and test it and validate it, because actually that might bring you a commercial consulting contract, as Ian said, or some kind of letter of interest that gives you weight with the bank. And in the end, for them, they had enough letters of interest where they could go and get structured debt funding from the bank. They didn't need to lose any equity, and they're able to scale. But you've got to always think of, what is the next question I need to answer to move my idea forward?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I was just wondering, we talk there about the familiarity, or I suppose how academics have to think a little bit differently in pitching and presenting their ideas. And so I was just wondering, Mel, if we turn to support rather than funding per se for academics moving into this space, what's that transition like, and how can we help them move across, as it were?
Yeah, thanks, Julie. I was reflecting a lot on this. And for some people, a lot of these words will be completely new for people to think about. If you talk to your academic and talk about, venture funding or angel investment or bootstraps within that, they might have a completely different perspective on what that is. And I think it's about helping our communities also get comfortable with what commercialization means and the processes by which it happens. And I think that's, again, a space that we're trying to work in, and again, drawing upon the aspect work within this, but also working with our colleagues in Innovate UK and taking lessons from the iCure training program within that, and trying to gather everything that we have so we can understand what does this mean for the social sciences, and actually how do we support people who may have worked a lot in knowledge exchange and impact, perhaps with policy or third sector, but how can we help people understand what this whole ecosystem really is about that, and where does it fit in? So I think that's one of the areas that we're looking at across from our doctor training partnership side of things, longer term, as supervisors, we have to look at the whole breadth of where that is, and supporting and working with universities to understand, and our university departments and the broad connection base to understand what would be the most added value. And actually, again, what is ESRC's or UKRI's role in supporting that and sharing best practices, developing case studies. Last year, we launched our commercialization toolkit as part of our impact toolkit online, just to kind of introduce the subject area and help people with just a framework of reference to come back to, because it is a new area, and understanding what's the difference between a social enterprise or a kick fund, or, there's a whole bunch of words and acronyms out there that we all need to start being comfortable with and owning in our own way, I think.
Yeah, excellent. And obviously the landscape's moving all the time, and so we've got a question in from Grace McConnell, actually, who's at LSE, which are, what are the panel's thoughts on the planned UK ARPA and its effectiveness in disrupting the UK innovation funding landscape? Mel, do you want to answer that one, or do you want to duck that one and I'll pass on to someone else?
I'm happy. I mean, I think the honest answer is I can't answer it, because we don't know what UK ARPA is.
No.
Like, I mean, and it feels like a bit of a cop-out. But I think what's important is in UK research and innovation, in the Wellcome Trust, in all sorts of funding agencies across the UK, there's a lot of early stage blue skies research that is funded. So that can't be forgotten about. Open calls, grants calls, etc. part of that. The question is how does UK ARPA, I think, how do we make sure we dock in so that we're creating a jigsaw puzzle, that it isn't creating, it can be a disruptor, and that's always a good thing, but we don't want it to just be a helium balloon attached to the UK ecosystem of innovation, and we want it to make sure it draws on that. So some of the, if people are interested and they have a look at the presentations that Sir Mark Walpott and Joe Johnson made to the recent committees, they've given their view on what the UK ARPA, where it would be best focused on, etc. And I recommend that you have a look and watch those, or read the transcripts, because that's probably the best knowledge that I have on where it could be going.
Yeah, because from your perspective as an innovator, how could this, what benefits could it bring?
So here's the thing, right? One of the common fallacies of international policy, and it's not just the UK thing, but we're particularly prone to this right now, is to look at what's happening in the US and think, we should just do that. We should build a Silicon Square. We should do this. We should do that. Now, here's the little hidden secret. The reason the US can do that is because you have practically unlimited capital at practically zero cost of capital, right? DARPA works because they have basically unlimited budget, close to $1 trillion, which costs them basically zero cost of capital. So what that means is you can do whatever you want in terms of building an innovation pipeline in these advanced materials defense industries. Our version, so our ARPA would have much more capital limitation. The capital wouldn't be free. It would be coming onto public purse at a cost. And so we cannot replicate that in the same way. The second part of this is the follow-on, right? So even if hypothetically I was to be able to say, here is an unlimited ball of money to go and innovate with, we also don't have the same volume of venture investors and corporate investors to then take those ARPA innovations and scale them up globally. So we've got two distinct market failures, which mean that in my view, and I am a layperson in this, in my view, we simply cannot adopt that route.
Yeah, well, I think that's very important messages to get out, actually, just in terms of, because they're absolutely fundamental. But I think the issue also about absorptive capacity is critical. And we've got an issue there about absorptive capacity by industry of innovation. We know in the UK we're very good at innovation, we're not very good at absorbing it. But we've also got to, so I think there's a number of things there that we could probably pick up on. I'll see what comes in on the Q&A and on the chat as well. We've got another question which has come in, which is related to absorption, but in a different way, which is the question of why is it, the question asked, do you think the majority of startups don't take advantage of the tremendous amount of available social science research? How can we help startups and social businesses leverage this work, create a mutual benefit for themselves and the academia that the research originated from? With a caveat that aside from accelerators that have limitations and lack scale. So how do we build those connections, do we think? Vikas, you're on my screen, so you have the floor is yours, and I'll turn to Ian and then to Mel. Was Ian?
Yeah, I think Ian came in first. So in the spirit of.
Thank you. So I think there's two elements to the answer to this. The first one is it comes down to telling people it's there and communicating, and don't forget that you can't expect people to know everything all the time, and they've got lots of messages coming their way. So it's on you to tell them the advantages that you offer them.
Yeah.
If you expect people to engage with you. I think the other element is you don't always need the best of anything to do a good startup. Yeah. I would urge you to focus. If I had to have a hierarchy of requirements, number one on my list would be get yourselves the best people you can possibly get your hands on, be it directly in the team or in the wider advisory role. Then get yourself the best connectivity you can to your customers, and then start worrying about the technology or the funding. Because if you know where the problem is and how to solve it, and you've got the people to deliver it, trust me, the money won't find it difficult to find you.
Yeah, fair enough. Mel, off you go.
Yeah, thanks. I agree with Ian. I mean, it's the question is, how accessible is your research? Why aren't they coming? It's not about why aren't they coming to me? It's how do we make it accessible and implementable for others? I.e., how do we move it from a theory base actually into practice? And how do we define it at the local, that if it's my business and I need to do that, how do I implement that? So I think that's the first challenge. The second challenge is most businesses don't even know social sciences exist in a university yet in this space. And if they do land in the university as a business, it's interesting. Do they get brought into STEM or engineering, or do they get brought to the management and business schools? They get brought to the anthropology departments or the sociology ones, where they could be looking at their business culture, etc. I think that's an interesting question too. There are many models about partnership. through some of the funding that we've had through the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund on the Next Gen Services, where they've been doing active business sprints with businesses. And actually during COVID, it's been really interesting to get the lessons about how the sprints of working with businesses are helping businesses take through and amend and adopt their models in a living way with a theoretical framework and support and challenge behind them. So it's about making the tools that are maybe out there accessible and in the right language, but it's how do you bring it down to the local, to them. And also, how do we start universities reaching out and starting partnerships? Because the more often that you get uptake is where partnerships already exist within that. So there's connections that can be done, just as the same in the policy space or the third sector.
Yes, it's about, you say, it's about building those, raising awareness on both sides, I suppose, isn't it? Both for business, for startups, certainly the stuff out there that might be relevant to them, but also to academics, that they have some knowledge that others might be interested in that they hadn't necessarily thought about. Vikas, what's your own experience in this space?
Yeah, I think what Melanie highlighted there is really important, which is, how are they going to know to work with the social sciences? Yeah. Because unless you've been through that system or understand it's not necessarily obvious. And actually, if you jump onto some of the business partnership pages of most universities and knowledge transfer parts of most universities, the social sciences aren't really very high up the list. There's lots of molecules and engineering and lasers and other other sort of such Meccano type things. So universities have to do a better job of communicating this. And again, like I said earlier, with the same parity as other sciences. I think the other angle is particularly with social sciences. If I take the Manchester example, it took Manchester a little while to realize that actually we're trying to be world class at some things when actually, just behind the door, there was already some of the world's most preeminent academics in global development, disaster medicine, emergency field medicine, and all these areas, which actually in today's world, in this very new changed world we're in, are actually much more important. So the world that we're in now, the world's new assumption of risk, the way that international governments and businesses are going to have to behave, a lot of the tools of the social sciences are now going to be front and foremost of people's minds in terms of how we build future resilience and deal with the problems that we're seeing now. But for any of this to happen, it has to come down to the institutions themselves to promote this work as having equal, if not more importance in some cases, than our colleagues in the hard sciences.
I think that's a really core challenge, actually. I think it's a really core challenge to universities themselves. I mean, I often say, because I'm at the LSE, listen, I sell social sciences because I've got nothing else to sell, right? That's all that's in the shop, with humanities as well, obviously through history. But there's something in that, which is that therefore, as an institution, as a Pro Vice Chancellor Research, as I was, that's what I would be promoting, because that's what we had. But you didn't necessarily see the same actually coming out from other universities and other PVCs. If one was asked about, well, what's the value of research, it would be a lot of, medicines and pills and widgets. And I think, as you say, having the confidence across social science, arts, humanities, shaped subjects to really say, well, this is what we are, and this is why we matter, and this is why we're important. And a number of people are saying, as you are, as we build forward now through COVID, we were all waiting for post-COVID, but that seems to be some way off. So as we build out and through, then actually the need for these our subjects and disciplines, I think, is all the more important. Mel, I noticed you've got a hand up to add on this.
Yeah, I was just reflecting as everybody else was talking about how a lot of universities have research parks. And I guess there's a challenge, where they're supporting incubations of businesses to help with. And I've been to launches of a few of them where they're very science heavy. And I guess there's a question within the own institution is how much are they drawing in the social science and humanities disciplines as part of the that's a great opportunity to bring in.
It's a great opportunity. Listen, we have 1 minute to go and we have much more to say, but I'm afraid we have no time in which to say it. So I'm just going to thank everybody for joining today's session. There is a little feedback survey at the end, if you wouldn't mind doing that. It then takes about a minute. The recording is going to go out live shortly. And also just to say that if you've missed any of the other series, you can access them on our website. And also our learning report, which brings together what we've been doing over the last year, and our learning evaluation from that is due to be published today shortly. So you can look at that as well. Many thanks to the panelists. Thank you so much, Ian, Vikas and Mel. Been fantastic talking to you. And thank you very much for everybody who's joined. Great. Have a nice day. Bye.